In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about the threat or supposed threat of artificial intelligence and particularly its implications for the creative and craft technical skills-based industries and methods of working. And there's a lot of artists, designers, creatives in general that are particularly concerned and threatened by this imminent emerging technology that's actually in a lot of ways been with us in many forms for a lot longer, but with this kind of AI branding there's a big fear aspect that is coming through in quite a Luddite way, I feel. It is being used potentially for undermining pernicious ends that kind of render human creativity useless, and the people really emphasize like the humanness of this, particularly when it comes to things like the idea of having an AI generated song or voice. But really I want to offer a nuanced perspective that AI is just another form of intelligence in this wonderful complex universe of ever increasing complexity, and that there are depths and kind of collective unconscious transpersonal thing happening that we can really see as just another part of us. Of course that doesn't make the fact that AI will be replacing a lot of people's income and jobs and livelihoods, and that's a different question that I'm not going to touch on too much today because I don't have that kind of economics problem solving mind. There are many people that do, and there are many people that are proposing various things for when humans are made redundant by technology, such as universal basic income or a bit more of a wealth redistributed economy, society, where people are supported regardless of what they contribute and do, because ultimately those skills are going to replace a lot of people, just as we've seen in the sort of self-checkout, self-driving vehicles kind of spaces. But there are particular implications for artists and creatives that really make people very afraid, and that's understandable, partly because of this conception we have of art as being a product of the human and the individual genius. But I want to kind of flip that a little bit today and open up maybe a broader discussion on these things. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the idea of art as being a human thing, and the idea of it being an individual thing that comes from an individual's consciousness and awareness and practice and skill. And of course there are many hours and many aspects of creative skills that are generated and created and cultivated by the individual. But there's this broader question of free will, and in fact, are we in fact just in a way also computers that are running scripts and repeating the same activities until we either, almost compulsively. And this kind of perspective, I find it quite refreshing because there's a huge ego attached to the idea that we might be like an individual that's separate, and we have gained our mastery through our own hard work. But I think there's a broader truth actually that when we are creating, particularly in the example of music, if you think about like the whole of human music production and history as a kind of resonance that got ever increasing complexity, and like in the time of Mozart or whatever, it was iterated in the form of like many notes and harmonies and many instruments in a kind of orchestral combination. And then with the advent of computers as technology, instruments being a previous technology, even acoustic instruments being a technology, now we have computers and digital instruments and all of those things, and every generation has had its like fear-based narratives of like we're the ones that are going to fuck everything up, we're the ones that are going to mess everything up, and we're the ones that are destroying the world, and technology is going to destroy us, and we're going to have like robots that are eating us or killing us. And they had this whole thing with the printing press as well in the whenever that happened in the I don't know, after the sort of Renaissance time, I can't remember exactly, and I can't remember the person that invented that. Anyway, But basically we are all, in a way, like the way our minds absorb information, select what's useful, store things, learn patterns, and run the same scripts, is quite like mechanical and computer-like. And you'll see it when people like tell stories or think thoughts or do the same things. It's like we kind of just tend to regurgitate the same things, and sometimes I'll catch myself, like go back to my diaries, for example, and I'll like read myself writing something and observing something like when I was 11 that I've also written. I've framed it in exactly the same way at the age I am now. And in that way, like what we think is us is actually just a kind of product of our environment, where we've sucked in like platitudes or idioms or language or words, ways of thinking about things. We've either like regurgitated it verbatim, or we've kind of like paraphrased it in our own way, or we have reacted against it and formed a kind of different way of phrasing something. But even that, like, yeah, I'm really keen to provoke this question of is that original? And what do we mean by originality? Because everyone, unless someone's been put in a room and neglected and not had any input from other humans or other sounds, for example, if they're a musician, and has just basically channeled, we don't really have a way of ascertaining that. And there are certain case studies about things like that which aren't that ethical, because it's somebody that's been feral, basically. Arguably, whatever your thoughts about feralness and different forms of intelligence, and that might be like freedom to some people rather than neglect. But yeah, there are many different ways to look at it. But I think this idea of the artificial intelligence threat as being just another form of universal life force intelligence that is iterating through computer technology, whereas before everything is kind of like, if it's through us and our creations, it's still not really us. And we've got maybe the false idea, maybe the mistake is that we've looked at it through the last few centuries from the Western individual perspective as this is a product of this person who is a genius / master of their craft through their own effort and hard work. I think in some ways we're going to look back at that and think that was the silly way of looking at it, because it's simply just not the case that anybody that's producing anything is original or has a sort of unique genius. And of course there are wonderful magical things that people do and great skills that people have and cultivate, but I don't think anyone really can claim that it's just them. Like, it's a combination of so many things around inclinations and schooling and education and everything you've absorbed before and everything that's come before. And certainly, like, when I write songs, they do kind of just sound like everything I've ever listened to, churned up, reshuffled, rejigged and spat out again. And particularly, I mean, even singing voices, you can hear, my friend once sent me this recording of, and I'll put it in the description below, but it's a Billie Holiday song sung by a really young girl in a kind of whatever country it was, has got talent contest on live television. And it's this really small, maybe like 6 or something, small girl who is singing a Billie Holiday song, and her voice sounds just like Billie, and it's probably because she's listened to Billie and emulated that recording with her singing voice. And that's the way we, the things we glean from our parents and our caregivers' voices, the ways that they sing, the way that we hear people sing on the radio, we can kind of just emulate that. And we, monkey see, monkey do, we are very like copy based, we ape other people around us, and that's how we learn, and that's how our brains work. So I think in a way we are getting computers to do that in a way that's more sophisticated now, and it doesn't require us to do as much to intervene in that, so we can input our voices, or input the I don't know, the kind of styles of something into a machine, and then and into a kind of code, and then it churns something out that brings all those things together in a really sophisticated way that's kind of unprecedented. But the real, I guess, issue comes with the fact that our whole creative industries and the way that we remunerate people and reward people and compensate people for their labour is already really sticky, and creatives have it hard with trying to, I suppose, monetise what they do, because in terms of originality and patenting ideas, I mean, you see it in stupid cases like the whole Marvin Gaye's, the estate of Marvin Gaye suing Ed Sheeran for having like a vaguely similar chord structure or something, even though like most pop songs iterate around those basic chord structures. But yeah, I think like in terms of money and compensation like this, and credit and value, and feeling like seen and like you're witnessed in your individuality and contributing to a broader cultural tapestry or conversation, those things are really important, because that's the way we exist as individuals who need to make money and support ourselves, and need to feel part of the community, probably through what we contribute individually, and that's what the whole AI thing, I guess, is probably going to mean that we have to rethink, just in the same way that technology has rendered certain jobs redundant. Think about it happen with the printing press, the combine harvester, all kinds of things through history that have been completely like they have rendered a lot of human labour useless. And ultimately, like, we're still going to need survival skills unless we have this exponential curve of transhumanism, where we just transcend our bodies and we're just in matrix-like cages with our thumbs tethered to a screen, like scrolling forever, which probably is happening, and we're doing it. I wouldn't say consensually, but we think we're in control of that. We think that we are, able to choose that, when actually I don't think we are in control. I don't think we do have free will, and a lot of other neuroscientists and people say that. So the question is, what do we do about things like, how do we credit artists whose content or imagery has been used by artificial intelligence to generate its produce? And it's a really complex question. There's different forms of different attitudes to this. Like, I personally am an image anarchist, so I think if something exists, if something's out of you, then like I have a lot of stuff on the internet for free because I don't really think it's mine. Like, I've produced it, sure, or I've channeled it, but I'm not going to claim to own it. And I guess maybe I'm silly because I'm missing out on an opportunity to generate income from my creativity if I was to lock it in and make it, make it more unique and original, like use this idea of originality to give different like access to it that's special. And I guess this is where the whole NFT conversation comes in as well, and how we create value through scarcity in creative production and creative products. But there's no easy answer. It's easy for me to say I'm an image anarchist, but I also it would be great to be supported for my art. I suppose I feel like ultimately, even if it's not financially, I am supported in my ventures in other ways, like something about the, what goes around comes around, and what you put out, you get back more and more. And I think as well, it's one thing saying that, and it's a bit of a lazy attitude, and I admit that, but maybe I've also never really felt that excited about being entrepreneurial, about my cultural output, and that's certainly a shadow that I have to navigate, and a lot of artists do. And those of us or them that are shrewd and have found a way to monetize their creative cultural production, whether it's freelance copywriting that now they just get an AI to do because it's, you know, instant and probably as good, especially now you're able to do valence and style and incorporate research in a much more rigorous way than the human brain can in that space of time. Then yeah, it just poses a lot of questions really, and I'm not here to answer anything, I'm just here to offer a perspective that I will reject the sort of doom narrative and surrender to the flow of what is happening, because ultimately we are not in control. We probably will have to adapt, as we always have, and I think we will. And there are things being used for pernicious ends and to manipulate people and to get people to buy things or spend their time through addiction mechanisms on things and in ways that they would rather not. But again, do we really have any control over that? That is the question. We don't use the apps use us. And I know I'm spouting platitudes here, but I'm really just not going to reinforce this fear-based narrative. And I think that I have a lot of compassion and sympathy for people who need to find ways to make money. And it's not just the case with artists and musicians, and ultimately the act of expressing ourselves creatively, whether it's singing a song in a room where your human voice coming from your corporeal sort of sticky weird human body is palpable in a way that a kind of computer generated performance isn't, and ultimately a poetic expression or channeling through a human body might be poetic and beautiful and presence inducing in a way that a poem from an AI never could be. I would also maybe say that I don't really buy that either, and that sometimes there are things of beauty and there are moments of beauty that are never they're not created by us. It's not just our genius. So I'm repeating this point again and again and again, just because that's really what I believe. And as well, I think always thought the idea of photography and filmmaking and, you know, someone claiming credit for that is absurd, because you're in a film or a photograph, you're collaborating with the camera, which has a very specific formal appearance or formal method that creates a very specific output based on the camera that you're using, even if you're doing things and twiddling knobs and changing settings to make it whatever, to make it look the way it has. It's still like you're collaborating with the camera, you're collaborating with the weather, you're collaborating with the lighting, you're collaborating with the figures or subjects in the scene. So I think we're just going to have to totally rethink the way that we consider humans and that individual's role, or the individual genius's role in artistic creation, because ultimately it's all a co-creation, it's all working with everything that's come before, the time that we're in, the technology that we have to hand, that yeah, perhaps we have invented that technology, or it's evolved through a deeper, wider intelligence. And I'm not necessarily saying aliens, I'm not necessarily saying God, but it's definitely like, it's not us, it's just not us, and we think it's us, and we've claimed that it's us, just in the way that people have claimed that this land belongs to me and I'm going to fence it off and create boundaries and laws to mean that I own this property, which is also just kind of nonsense and abstraction. It's language, it's all of this, and it's in the human kind of frame of systems and understanding that we've done that, but it's ultimately quite absurd. And I think what we're going to see is a shift into a more transpersonal, non-individual, so individual perspective on these things, because we're going to have to, because we're not going to be able to sustain this use of the individual or this honouring of the individual in the same way. That's not to say we shouldn't hold space and honour and witness and love one another in our expressions and creations, but it might not be attached to art in the same way, especially as more people are evolving creatively and developing creative pursuits and have access to technology that allows them to express themselves, because that's ever increasing saturation, iteration, expression, overwhelm, and I'm not of a scarcity mindset, but ultimately like there's not enough attention and sort of space or time to perceive everything that everyone is creating and love it and validate that person for what they created. So that's also going to be something that we have to think through or evolve through, and that's a separate conversation about the human and the ego and what we need in terms of love and validation for our expressions. And often actually the creation of the art isn't the most direct way to get those needs met. We actually go to the art or we go to the craft to create something in a sort of compulsive way to then like put a medium in between us and the person that it lands with on the other side. So it's a very round houses way, and there is a more direct form of love and care and witnessing that can happen. But the art is something else, and the art does something that language and that one-to-one or one-to group communication cannot. And that's a separate conversation. I'm also going to talk more about co-regulation and auto-regulation and self-regulation and how art fits in there in a separate video. And I'd love to have more events and discussions about these questions that are on the tip of people's tongues and help people to, really feel into their grief around this, especially as it relates to things like being replaced by technology or loss of income through that, and how we adapt. So definitely tune into Heart School's other channelings, tune into the events that we might be running around this, and get in touch with me for one-to-one coaching around some of these things. Thank you for watching, and know that you are whole, or we are whole, and we are not separate. And I truly believe that. Thank you.